So Tyler and I did a video a few weeks ago about what's a better buy, or are Verizon or AT&T, or are they better buys? And our conclusion was no, don't buy any of them. But there's a third company that provides telecom services, and I should have been more proactive about doing a video on them because they are my mobile phone carrier, and that is T-Mobile. We're going to dive into T-Mobile. Before we do, please take a minute and check out the link you see on your screen for a special message from our sponsor, The Motley Fool. You can get the top 10 stocks to buy right now, and it's a great way to support this work we're doing on our YouTube channel. So just looking at profitability and valuation and things like that, it doesn't seem like T-Mobile would be a great investment in some ways. For example, it trades for a little over 18 times forward earnings. Both AT&T and Verizon trade for less than 7 times forward earnings. When there's such a big discrepancy between three companies that do a similar thing, it's usually for a reason. The dividend is another story. T-Mobile pays about 1.8% right now. Verizon and AT&T pay 8.5% and 7.5% respectively. Again, that should be a red flag that something might be up with Verizon and AT&T, not necessarily with T-Mobile. And looking at some of the numbers, it seems like T-Mobile's business is doing the best of the three right now. Its customer churn rate in the second quarter was a record low. 0.77% churn rate is very, very good for a mobile provider. It added 760,000 postpaid subscribers in the second quarter. And it generally just kind of does this by being a great wireless carrier. It has one of the most reliable networks, if not the most reliable network out of the big three. It offers much better value proposition. My wife and I comparison shopped, and what we could get from AT&T and Verizon wasn't anywhere near what we're paying for T-Mobile. And they do it without adding all kinds of fluff, like AT&T acquired, DirecTV and Warner Media. So, Tyler, what is your general thought on T-Mobile and why it might be worth a look, even though at first glance it might seem like an expensive stock?
You kind of hinted at it with they don't make a lot of dumb acquisitions like AT&T and Verizon did for good years now. And, there's also a lot of fixed at home internet cable. There's a lot of outgoing spending that's not necessarily related to mobile carriers associated with AT&T and Verizon that allows T-Mobile to focus a little bit more. And it's also worth pointing out that there is something that was unique for T-Mobile with the acquisition or the merger, however you want to describe it, with Sprint. I grew up in a pretty rural part of America, of the United States, and for the longest time, AT&T and Verizon, actually it was almost where we were, Verizon was the only game in town. It didn't matter who you had to have Verizon because it's the only place you could actually get coverage. And so with the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint, it allowed those companies to consolidate a lot of their overlapping coverage and allow them to deploy into places they hadn't previously deployed and reach out to a customer base that neither company had been able to do on their own because they just didn't have the capacity to do so. They were too busy building duplicate networks in, just say metropolitan New York City, for example, rather than, let's just consolidate down to a single one, and then we can reallocate those assets into places where we can capture market share in other other areas. So it had that nice tailwind running for it for a long time. And if you look at some of the subscriber numbers that they had, it's gone up, considerably to the point where right now, they're not, wouldn't call them like one for one the same, but T-Mobile's mobile subscriber users are within striking distance of Verizon's right now. And you could almost get to the point where you would say that Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T have all gotten to we'll not call it the saturated one, but T-Mobile has kind of taken enough market share from the other ones that they're starting to get into the point where maybe they resettle back at these new market share sort of levels, and so that was a nice headwind that they had for a long time. You can also, take out some of those duplicate costs, like I was just saying. If you're not running two networks in New York City, you probably don't need probably only need half the people servicing that network than you previously had. And so some cost benefits, some network benefits. You were able to reach out to new customers. It gave you just a better growth position than you had before, and it certainly has ridden those catalysts for some time. Now, I'm gonna just give the negative case here, just because even though T-Mobile has been the better investment, here's where I think it could go wrong. I'm not saying I 100% believe this, but it could go wrong. Now that it has started to reach that saturation level where it's within striking distance of Verizon's mobile carrier base, and if we want to talk about those three just basically owning all of the market share, all you're really doing now is cannibalizing one or the other, and that just gets that much harder to do when everyone's covered. Any customer anywhere in the United States can basically freely pick between one or the other, and there's no real compromise in terms of coverage, in terms of capacity, whatever. There's going to be a fight on price, and eventually T-Mobile is going to run up against that just as much as Verizon and AT&T did as T-Mobile is coming up. It's a tailwind that can't last forever, right? And also, as we've mentioned before, these deploying and maintaining these mobile carrier infrastructure is extremely expensive. There's going to be new spectrum that's got to be acquired, that you're going to have to actually build out all of this new infrastructure. And T-Mobile is no different. They're going to have to spend just as much money as the other companies to deploy all this stuff, and that's going to be a drag for a very long time. It's extremely capital intense to basically keep servicing the exact same customer. There's not a whole lot of growth to all of that capital deployment. So that, in my view, could be the way that what was previously a market-beating stock and one that has done much, much better than Verizon and AT&T, could eventually settle into an AT&T and Verizon type performance. I'm not saying it is going to happen, but I think that's the path of how it could happen.
See, and I would push back and say that the lack of stupid acquisitions, for lack of a better term, gives them more room to be able to invest that capital and absorb those costs.
Can't argue on that one.
Yeah, so just to kind of give you a couple of numbers right here. So T-Mobile's debt load makes up roughly 48% of its market cap. It has a total of about $84 billion in debt and $168 billion market cap. AT&T's debt load makes up 128% of its market cap. And Verizon also has a debt load that is more than its entire market cap. And that's not even counting short-term debts that are going to need to be refinanced or paid off within the next year, of which AT&T has $8 billion and Verizon is $15 billion. So the balance sheets alone show why that you have that extreme difference in valuation.
Yeah, I mean, but AT&T and Verizon are just paying it all out in dividends, which isn't retained earnings. And retained earnings is where you get the debt to capital. So you can see how that happens.
Yeah, like I said, stupid acquisitions didn't help either. I think Warner's especially was financed primarily through debt, and ended up being a complete dud. So I like T-Mobile. If I were going to buy one of the three of these, it would probably be T-Mobile. I'd like to see them take steps to maybe be a little bit better of a dividend stock, since they're essentially a utility, over time. But they're on the right track. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to click subscribe if you don't subscribe to my channel already. And as always, this video is sponsored by The Motley Fool. Be sure to visit www.fool.com/Frankel to receive the top 10 best stocks to buy now.